Well, awesome. So thanks so much for joining in. I'm so excited that we're able to have folks from around the globe
Yay.
participate in this. So hopefully we make it worth your while. I know the time difference can be tough for some. So thanks so much for tuning in. So real quick, I feel like we should probably introduce ourselves first and tell you a little bit about ourselves. I've been with Netflix for just under 6 years, working within our talent organization. I'm currently a recruiter and have been supporting our data teams for full time for the past 8 months or so. I've been working in the HR and recruiting space for about 14 years. And on Netflix, I'm currently binging Beef as well as Indian matchmaking. I'm very excited about season 3 premiering later this month. I'm just ready for more Seema from Mumbai in my life. So very excited.
Nice. I'll quickly introduce myself too. First of all, when I first saw the slides from Patricia, I was thinking, wow, what a coincidence. We're watching exactly the same thing. I have been always a big fan of Ali Wong. It's just so amazing that, she's also an actress and producer now. It's such a great show. I recommend for everybody. And Indian Matchmaking is also such a fun show to watch too. And so for me, I have been working for Netflix for about 3 years now. And it's such a great team for data engineers to work. And then a lot of my inspiration for my content on LinkedIn is coming from my day-to-day work. And so for me, I have been part of the personalization on data engineering team. And I build a lot of data system kind of supporting the personalization algo data needs. And my favorite TV show, no doubt, my all-time favorite on Netflix is The Queen's Gambit. It's such a great show, and I was just like so hooked when I saw one trailer because it's such a interesting kind of story I can really resonate with. Being a woman in tech, and then how Beth kind of navigated like a male-dominated field. It's such a good TV show. If you haven't checked it out, you should definitely do. And subscribe to Netflix.
So awesome. I'm just going to walk you through a few common pitfalls that we see in the day to day. As a recruiter, you're seeing thousands of resume submissions. There's some pretty great ones, and there's others that can use a bit of zhuzhing to make it stand out a bit more. So I'll just walk you through a few common pitfalls recruiters see in the day to day as we review resumes for data engineering positions. So the first one is information overload. This tends to be quite common with experienced candidates. And, you've likely accumulated a ton of relevant experience at various companies, and you want to share that information with, to show that why you're a great candidate, which totally makes sense. But it can be a bit overwhelming to read. General rule of thumb, if you can try to condense your resume down to a page or two max. We'll zoom in a bit further to the first page of this resume because I think there are different ways we can reformat this to make it stand out a little bit better. So the first thing I think about is let's connect the dots a bit more. A question to ask yourself is, what are the most important things to highlight that are related to the role that I'm applying for? So while this person may be a full stack developer, if you are applying for a DE role, let's bump up the most important DE related work to that first bullet. Remember, you're trying to catch the recruiter or the hiring manager's attention, and here is where we can get them interested in learning more. So if a hiring manager and recruiter feels like maybe the first bullet doesn't really relate to the job that they have, they just may pass on the person before even getting to the applicable skills. So let's just bump up the most relevant information towards the top. Also, just feel free to edit and be a bit more intentional about how you display your work experience. And I think, while you've done such amazing work, let's pare it down a little bit more and make your resume clear and concise. Some other tips, make sure you're correcting spelling along the way and you have consistent formatting. But, on the flip side, though, I do think that there's some really interesting nuggets in here, too. There are certain experiences that you might have that don't necessarily need to be in the resume. So, for example, this person highlights mentoring, which is such a great leadership quality. And so, but maybe perhaps we can kind of kick that over into a cover letter to talk to more in depth about your experience. So that's the first one. The second one, a common pitfall here is coming off too robotic and creating a very technical resume. And so while there is obviously a lot of value in highlighting the technical work, there is just as much value in showcasing the overall business impact. So the first bullet reads, worked on developing Spark scripts to do an ETL process and store the data in S3 that comes from Kinesis Firehose. This is great. But the question I have as I was reviewing this is, who are you doing this for? Who's the consumer of this data? What problems are you trying to solve? And how did you help this person or group get there? This information is just as important. So don't just focus on the tasks you've done, highlight the results. Another quick nitpicks, let's again make sure formatting is consistent. But I also want to call out some of the positives here as well. I think there's some pretty solid things about this resume as well. So we'll zoom out a little bit. And what you can see is this resume is just super easy to read. The most applicable sections are towards the top. And, to each their own, but I love a bolding of a keyword. It makes it so much easier to read. Recruiters are reviewing tons of resumes at a time. And, speaking for myself, you can scan through a resume so much easier if the tools and languages are bolded. Other highlights, contact information. There was a ton of, folks that moved around, especially during the pandemic. So make sure that it's important to keep that updated so folks can contact you. And another thing, having a professional email address. There's been times where candidates use the same email addresses that they've had when they were in high school. So, for example, emailing Shinran Weibel or Shinran.Weibel is different than emailing Skatergirl 1980 at AOL, right? So it's a little bit different. And so just make sure you have that professional email on your resume.
It's so funny you mentioned it because I made this exactly same mistake when I was in college. I was using this email that looks like a scam sender for a really long time. And I'm just really glad that I made the choice to actually have a Gmail that looks like an actual person. And I also just really love the tip on bolding the keyword. That's something, honestly, I never thought about, even on my own resume. But looking at this resume here, like when you kind of zoom it out, it's just so much easier to see all the key information that you want people to see. So that's a really awesome tip there.
Awesome. And then to answer the question, there isn't a one size fits all format, right? What I will say though is it takes a reader 5 to 10 seconds to make a judgment call on whether to move your resume forward or pass. So hit the reviewer with the most eye-catching items so they're left with some curiosity to learn a bit more. So the third pitfall, being overly generic. I get it. We've all looked for jobs before. We've all sat on the other side of the interview desk or computer screen. It's taxing. It's a laborious process. Feels like a full-time job. So I think, we do find ways to streamline the process by creating a generic resume. But if we can tweak a few things here and there, I think we can come up with a more personalized approach to showcasing your interest in a role. So people tend to have some pretty strong opinions about summaries and objective statements. I think, honestly, it can go either way. As long as you're sharing something really meaningful. There's only so much room on a resume to make a case for why you're a top candidate. And that real estate on that 8x10 sheet of paper is so valuable. So let's make the most of it through personalization. So while these examples here work just fine, it does come off a bit generic. And so I think we can fine tune these statements to be more personable and, just specific to the role that you're applying for. So Here are a few examples. I love this first one. I'll read it really quickly. In 2017, I began my journey to self-teach myself coding. In 2021, it paid off when I got a job at Amazon. While there, I saved S3 Glacier millions of dollars by solving difficult problems. So first impressions, this person likely just has strong determination and courage to do a career shift. And then they landed a job at one of the largest tech companies. So kudos to them. Secondly, what I love about this is that they highlight the business impact. You save the company millions of dollars. Tell me how you did that. And do you want to do that at my company? It shows that you might be a problem solver who can figure out a complex situation, even though you may or may not have all that's equipped within like the nice to haves and must haves of a job description. There's definitely signs of potential here. Obviously we have to have a conversation to verify some of these things, but it's definitely a promising start.
Yeah, I really love this call out here because I think a lot of people don't kind of have like quick summary or introduction of themselves or what they're looking for on top of resume. I started including those kind of 2 years ago. And I feel like that kind of serve as a super tiny cover letter in a way. Just tell me a little bit more about yourself. That doesn't necessarily fit into skill or experience or your certificate section, right? Like in this example here, I just really love how this person talk about how, this person taught him or herself about coding, and then it really show off just, that eagerness to learn, and it just shows you more personality and also what kind of thing you enjoy and looking for other than, all the project you have done. And on the second one here, I really love how this person is personalizing this objective too. Like, I would totally change this maybe a bit differently for Netflix versus another job applying. And I just love the statement about like how relevant information and relevant experience he had in the past or she have in the past will be applied to this job role that's this person is applying for. That just make you feel like this person does the research and then he cares about it, right? So that's really awesome.
Most definitely. I think by personalizing in the second example, by personalizing it, it makes me feel like your application is very intentional. You're helping connect the dots here, right? And yes, it is a very long one sentence, but it shows me that you've done your due diligence here. Like for example, I have an ads data engineering role. You have data ads experience. I'm very intrigued. I want to read on. You've worked with petabytes of data. So does my team. Let's like find out more and have a conversation. So I'd be inclined to set up a call with this person to find out a bit more.
Absolutely. Here actually is a question. Let me highlight on the screen. Can you see it, Patricia?
Yeah.
Can we skip the summary section from the resume if we have enough work experience, project and skills or education?
I think so. I mean, again, no like a standard resume format. And so if that information is in other places within your resume, I think that's totally fine to skip the objective or summary statement.
Gotcha. Thank you for the question.
Awesome. Perfect. So moving on. So the last pitfall that we typically see is we want you to showcase the impact of your contributions through data. Most of us here are in the data world, so I'm sure we especially love how numbers can tell a very powerful story. So we can make that work for us by including quantifiable results in your resume. So here are two examples that you just said. I'll add in, that in addition to quantifying, being as specific as you can is always super helpful, but also do this without like getting in trouble. I don't want anyone to violate any NDAs here. So use your best judgment here and highlight the work that is most applicable. So anyway, if you read the highlighted portions, implement an ETL pipeline to handle over 700,000 daily logins, build a chat app and just decrease the connection waiting time by over 60%. This is great information, and you're drawing parallels between your work and what is likely outlined in the job description. In the second example, I love that this person highlighted how they impact the business and increased efficiency. They talk about the business problem and what they did to bring the solutions to the table. I think these are two really strong examples of how you measure your impact on the business.
We have a few questions here I'm going to pick. For example, here's a question related to certification. So if one person have certificate at some relevant scale, is that a good idea to put a logo there?
I think sometimes I don't know about the logo. I might just kind of put the information on the resume. You want to make sure that the resume is like very clear and easy to read, and you don't want to distract people by putting too much on the resume. So maybe I would just kind of put the name of the certificate, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And also that saves you some space, so you can put other information there too.
Well, awesome. And so I know Shinran is going to talk a little bit more about tips from an interviewer perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. It was really great summary. And yeah, so from here, I'll pick a few more kind of experience section that I see from folks who submit their resume. And I want to talk a little bit more about what it might look like from a peer engineer who might be reviewing your resume to get a better understanding of your experience, your expertise. And also, I'll also talk a little bit more about if, let's say, I am conducting like a resume deep dive or project deep dive interview. If I look at your resume, what kind of follow-up question I might ask you. So let's get started on that part as well. So here's one kind of experience section from a resume. And I personally also think this is a great experience. And this person kind of works with many different frameworks in AWS as part of this internship. And one thing I really love about this description of experience here, it highlighted by the relevant frameworks. And as an engineer that, to some extent, I have a good understanding of what is equivalent framework. So I can automatically kind of translate that to something that my team use. For example, let's say if you work with BigQuery, then I feel like, well, this person probably wouldn't take much time to onboard to a data lake solution that we use here. So always highlight relevant frameworks. And another tip is that if you have worked with multiple frameworks that kind of fall into very similar category, I would say definitely pivot that towards the job role you're applying for, because you don't want to overload your resume with too much information. So personalize it a bit and then highlight the keyword, and that would really catch the eye of the interviewer. So some of the improvement opportunity here I want to call out. So one thing is that I would like to hear more details about this AWS frameworks that's part of experience here. For example, in the first line is talking about I developed an end-to-end automated AWS framework. However, after reading the whole section here, I'm not entirely sure what does this framework do, what kind of value does this drive. So give me more detail to help me understand the end-to-end use cases. And that's also one thing we look a lot more when we interview is that does this person understand the business problem behind the question? Does this person understand how your data is being used? That's something that it will be helpful to include in your resume, like maybe in a concise way, similar to what Patricia is talking about, numbers, connecting the dots, but also like when you prepare for interview or project dive, thinking about like how you can frame a good data story from a business problem you're trying to solve, and how you translate that into a data problem, and how you come up with a scalable solution. Another similar comment here is that this section here talks about like experience of designing system. However, it doesn't tell me like how do you design the system? What system do you design? Or who do you work with to design the system? Or what kind of trade-offs did you consider? So that could be something you could put in your resume. However, that's also something would come up when you were interview, when you do a deep dive. And another thing, a kind of a minor suggestion here is that just be really mindful about what terms you put on there, because there might be a lot of terms that's only relevant or super, that's something that you understand when you work on this specific team, but not much for interviewer who's from a different company. One example here is the terms that called IDQS. I actually went to Google this term. However, I still not sure if I found the right thing. I couldn't really tie it to the experience. So be mindful of what details you put in there that will be helpful to catch the eye of a recruiter versus details that maybe you can left out so that people can focus more on the stuff you want to highlight and relevant. So yeah, up to the next one. Let's see. Okay, next one. This one is a really good one too, and I think it's really highlighted a little bit different experience and the way of like presenting an experience. So my favorite part about the resume here is that it used a lot of numbers, and then numbers just make me feel like this experience or this project you have is super real. And for example, here requires a backfill of 3 years of data, balancing 15 archived nodes, perform backfill for 2 weeks. And those are really good numbers. And before you write your resume, maybe find those numbers and insert it there. For example, how many gigabytes or terabyte data you process, right? So I love the numbers here. And one thing, honestly, that's something I never thought about it before, but I think it's really helpful for me when I was reading this resume. It is one-line description of this company. So this person is from Korea, and then he worked at a company called Cross Universe. So for me, especially when you're applying for a job at a different country, you are experiencing from different one, maybe there's companies that, for me, I'm not familiar of because I live and work in US. So here, it's just super helpful for me to know like, hey, this is what Cross Universe do. It's the #1 Korean blockchain company, right? And save me the time to Googling it. And also tells me about like this business domain you're working with. And that's something I never thought about. And I'm thinking that maybe I'll do it for my future resume when I found it relevant. So Patricia, how do you feel about it from a recruiter perspective?
Yeah, I love it. You're putting the relevant information out there that's going to be super helpful for any reader to kind of understand. You're understanding the scale of data. You're understanding what is this company? What do they do, and how do you? And what I like about it is that you're connecting the dots here. You're talking about your experience and how it aligns with potentially a job description or some of the requirements of the role.
Yeah, totally. And then also a few improvement opportunities here I want to call out. So on the first line here, it talk about, this person built overall data pipelines with, this frameworks listed here. However, one thing you can add more colors to experience is that what do you build this data pipelines for? What kind of business function does it support? Or what exactly the use case of your data? Adding those information will be super helpful for me to know that, hey, you're driving business impact, and also from a perspective that, and also in a way you're telling me that you know how your data is being used and what kind of business impact it's driving. So that's something you could add more here. And another thing I want to call out here is that so this is only one section in the resume, but I noticed like on this resume, it's really giving a lot of emphasis on this person being independently working with tech solutions. On one hand, I think that's great because it's telling me that this person can join the team and be independently working and building some data system. However, at the other hand, I would be mindful about like overemphasizing on working alone because to me, being a data engineer is also about being able to working collaboratively with cross-functional stakeholder, and that's also part of day-to-day life. So like at the same time, you can talk about how you independently work building data system, but also at the same time, I would recommend to maybe balance that off a little bit, talk about what kind of stakeholder do you use to work with and how do you work with them to come up with a better design or similar experience to highlight your team working experience. Any thoughts on that, Patricia?
No, I love that. You're kind of highlighting that you can flex, you can work independently if you need to, you can work collaboratively. You're able to work in various environments, and I think that is such a great skill to have.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's jump to the next one. Okay, so I know this section of experience already appeared before, but I want to talk a little bit more about it just from an interviewer perspective. Again, one thing I love here is mentioning the number, talking about how many data you're processing. That's really awesome. And also, it also talked about different programming languages you're using as part of the job. So that, in addition to having a scale section that's saying, hey, I know SQL, Python, Scala, also inserting programming language as part of experience tells you that, hey, I have experience working in real life projects too. So I love that part. And some of them manage suggestions for improvement opportunities as well. So I feel like this, this experience here can be expanded a little bit. For example, the first line here talking about aggregated unstructured data from multiple sources. And actually, I think here you're missing an opportunity of highlighting different data stores you have experience with. If you're working with source from S3 or BigQuery or Iceberg, I would recommend putting it there because that's a way to show off your skill of being familiar with certain framework as part of your work experience, right? And another thing I love to talk about here is data modeling. I feel like data modeling is such an overlooked skill that sometimes people don't think about it because they're so used to work with like already built data, but also for a data engineer, that's something you also do as part of your day-to-day work. How do you understand the business problem and build relevant entity data model, right? So I love that this person, I know a lot of resumes that focus a lot on data pipelines, but then I love this person also talk about the experience with data modeling too. And then here, like I would even expand it a little bit more. What kind of entity data are you modeling? Tell me more about it. And what kind of business problem were you trying to answer with all this project experience you have? And another example here is like, there's another line here talking about this person build a unit dashboard to visualize core metrics, right? Actually, I would love to know what kind of core metrics are you talking about? Daily active users, or maybe something about I don't know, total viewing hours every day. I don't know. I'm just making it up, but telling me more about the metrics that you're working on if you're building a dashboard. All right, up to the next one. So this one is also a really good example, and then it's really distinct in a way to me because it highlighted so many different aspects of data engineering. And from my perspective, kind of similar to what I'm talking about, a lot of people like to talk about just building data pipelines. However, there's much more to that from data engineering perspective. And the one thing we keep talking more and more these days as a community is that how we can bring the engineering best practice and excellence to data engineering too. And this experience here is a really good example of that, how you can do that to add more color, that you're not just building data pipelines, you're not just writing ad hoc scripts, but you are also trying to adopt engineering best practice too. So to be specific, like here, he talked about he built data pipelines, and also one thing is that improve data pipeline efficiency. That is like a performance, tuning type of work we also do. And that's also something that highlights that, hey, this person doesn't just write a script and throw it there. They also cares about making a job more efficient. So that's a really good, experience to add it there if you have any. And third one, oh, I love that one too, is talking about how you implement CI/CD. And that's just a really good signal for me that I know that this person cares about engineering best practice. And maybe if this person join my team, like, this person will bring those good qualities to my team and influence my team to be adopting more engineering best practice too. So that's really great. And also data quality. Wow, like this person is covering so many good aspects. Like this person cares about data quality and also build relevance frameworks to automate that, making it more efficient. So that is really awesome. So all these 4 lines here highlight the different aspects or types of work the data engineer can do. And I would really encourage like everybody to think about like, hey, besides building data pipelines, what other work can I throw out there that's also showing me I'm a good engineer, right? So this section is really awesome. Some of the growth opportunity though, For example, I would recommend adding a little bit more kind of specific framework you use. For example, the first line, orchestrated trustworthy data pipelines handling millions of records daily using AWS and Spark. Like for example, here you can tell me what orchestration tool are you using. Is that Uzi or Airflow? Is that some other tools? So in there would be super helpful too. And another one, again, telling me more about the business impact you're driving. And you can talk about, hey, did that enable our personalization algorithm? Did it enable some product feature on the business you're working on, including some numbers so that it helped tie the dots. All right, next one. Yeah, okay, this is also one of my favorite section I was reading. And one thing it's doing really well here is it has a lot of number. For example, load 200 million of records and 10 million of record to snowflakes. So all those numbers are awesome. It tells me the scale of data you're working with, and also specific frameworks that included, for example, sorry, Snowflake, Redshift, S3. So those are really awesome. Another thing, maybe consider you can like bold them a little bit as part of the resume so you can easily see that what kind of framework you're working on. And this resume also gives a lot of business context too. For example, build the ETL pipeline for a customer data exchange initiative, right? So that is a good example, like how you can tie the business impact to the technical work, and also design the Snowflake schema and row SQL store procedures to support a customer 360 dynamic view generation. Overall, I just really love this section here because it's really concise. It tells you that what you did, what framework you use, what business impact you're driving with number, and it's super crisp, and it's super easy to read as well. And it's also really good use of space too. I noticed that on this resume, all the lines are either like 80% filled or 90% filled. So it's a really efficient use of space. Sometimes I see like people just like leave a really empty line there or start a new line, but only the second line only have 2 words there. If you have a lot of information, maybe thinking about formatting a little bit better, it looks better when you use the line better, and also gives you more space to include more relevant context as well. So in this resume, it also talks a lot about data modeling schema design. That's really awesome. And I noticed that there's a one line kind of hidden in there in the first experience, that design a Snowflake schema, right? That's something I might even put it in a completely independent line itself. So to highlight you have data modeling experience, I mean, maybe just to tell me a little bit more about what data you were modeling, right? So this is a really minor suggestion, but overall, this section is really awesome, and I really love it. And good job. All right.
Yeah. So thanks for those who submitted their resume. It's not always easy receiving feedback, but hopefully this helped, kind of better edit and reformat some of your resumes.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for submitting your resume. I know that it's not always a comfort experience to your resume there, but I hope that it was helpful for people who wrote those resume, but also is helpful for people like who's also working on their own resume, right? And so we still have some time, and I will stay here and take some Q&A. So actually, Patricia, I have a few questions for you. So
Sure.
I'm curious, how do you, so besides resume, I know that's something that, it always asks for during like job application. I'm curious that, how do you feel about like LinkedIn profile? Because LinkedIn is also heavily used to kind of recruiting talent and apply for jobs these days. So what's your kind of tips on preparing a LinkedIn profile and get your kind of portfolio stand out there?
Wow. So many tips, so many thoughts. I think the first thing is just to optimize your LinkedIn profile. As a recruiter, you have an idea of what you're looking for through a job description. There are some keywords that you're looking for. So if I'm looking for a data engineer, obviously SQL, likely Python, Java, Scala, whatever it is, right? Highlighting frameworks. I'm going to throw those keywords into a LinkedIn search, and then, we'll get a number of results. And so, if you want to be found on LinkedIn, definitely optimize your profile by adding those keywords, adding some of the type of work that you've done, that it's interesting. Data engineering, or having a data engineering title, can mean so many different things, right? Are you more of a traditional data engineer? Are you a software engineer that does some data? Are you working on product analytics versus infrastructure, right? There's so much to peel back to understand the type of work that you're doing. So having that information on your profile is super helpful as recruiters are sourcing for candidates and finding folks that are, most aligned to some of the roles that they're hiring for.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned another good point that I found is also a challenge when you are kind of navigating the job market as a data engineer, is that there's so many different job titles that you could be doing data engineering work. Sometimes I found a lot of analytical engineer or data scientists who also doing maybe 50% data engineering work. And then they want to maybe transition to a full-time data engineer. Or a lot of times, it might be titled like BI engineer or software engineer. I'm curious, a lot of people talk to me asking hey, my title wasn't data engineering in my previous role, but I want to transition into a full-time data engineer role. What's your advice there around kind of framing your resume or LinkedIn profile so that it will still be able to highlight that you have relevant data engineering work experience?
Yeah, I think that's where context is key, right? Making sure that you're adding those bullets that are related to the data engineering work that you've done, and making sure that that is pretty obvious, right, on your profile and resume. So that, again, that way you're giving the context to whoever is reading your information that, okay, maybe you don't have the right title. It's going to vary from company to company, but the actual work you're doing is there. Right. So, anyone who is reviewing your information is going to want to find out more. Why are you titled the data scientist, but I see you're creating pipelines? And so, it's something to just highlight and make sure it's out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice. So I think there's one question here. I think a lot of people will be curious. So if I don't have kind of any past work experience, what projects would you recommend to put in your resume for entry-level data engineering job? So I'm curious from a recruiter perspective, if this person maybe the student or doesn't have any work experience, what are the things that would stand out most to you? I know there's people doing kind of a project on their own, maybe using some open source data, or it could be some kind of certification. I'm curious, what is it from a recruiter perspective?
Yeah, this is a good question. So, part of it is if you have any internships, highlighting the work that you've done there, connecting the dots, right? And showing, the experience that you've had in internships or done side projects, link in your GitHub. What are some of the things that people can see to connect the dots as to why you might be a good fit for their role? So presenting the information to the reviewer so they can say, oh, I know you don't have official experience working as a data engineer, but I've seen that you've done a lot of the stuff that is aligned with the role that I'm hiring for. So, make a case as to why you're a best fit by showcasing that work there.
Yeah, and also therefore, it's actually another relevant question here is that when you're working on a project, maybe it's not necessary for a company. So in a way, you kind of lost the part of being able to tie it to some business impact, right? So let's say if a person just don't have work experience, but they have a lot of project experience, Is there anything that they can do to kind of, if they can't including numbers of business impact, is there anything they can add there for their project experience to make it, looks richer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd want to understand like what the project is and what the purpose is, and what was the outcome of that. And then, being able to explain that in a concise way. You don't want to do like a 3-pager on why this project was important. But you want to give enough context there to show like what the relevance is, right? And so again, being able to highlight that is going to be pretty important.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. We're just looking at some of the questions here. Okay, there's another good question. How could the applicant stand out if we're applying for a company without name recognition?
So, I think there's other things, right, that go beyond just like, oh, I worked at a FANG or this great company, right? Again, it goes back to making those parallels, right, and showcasing why you're a good candidate. So yes, the name is going to be sort of like the thing that draws people in. But if you dig deeper, you're going to showcase why you're going to be an important, like why the work that you've done is related. And so again, I think, what people do sometimes is, they have a really generic resume, but take a look at the job description and make sure that the bullets there align with your bullets on the resume. So again, you're making a case for why you're a good fit. And so again, it's not just about the name recognition of a company, but what did you actually do? That's going to be important.
Yeah, definitely. I personally feel like sometimes, you might feel like if your experience have tech company, that gives you a lot more advantage. However, I think from an interviewer perspective, when we do a project deep dive, that's where we really look into what's the depth of the project you're doing. And then at that point, the name of your company really matters a lot less, but more about how in depth did you think about the solution you are building, and and then if this person have the good soft skill, that will be a good fit for the team. Yeah, thank you, Patricia. And there's another interesting question. How do people? How would you recommend people put kind of this online courses on their resume? Because I know it's really common these days. People learn about coding or different skills through online courses or certification versus through actually a college, right?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, you guys. If it's applicable, like throw it in there, right? You're making a case as to why you're a good fit, and if it's relevant, like I think it's worth adding if it makes sense.
Yeah. Let's see. So, okay, I have actually another question here. It's not highlighted, but so I'm curious how. Okay, this is actually exactly the thing I was going to ask you. So when I was helping some of the friends doing kind of reviewing resumes, they were asking me, like, I'm worried that I don't have enough keyword, and if I'm missing a few, the algorithm or pre-screening gonna filter me out. I think that's a very common question from folks who's applying for tech jobs these days. So what's your take on that?
This is such an interesting question because, I hear often like, how do I get my resume past the ATS, or, how do I make sure it gets in front of a human set of eyes? In my experience, I'll say that I haven't had an algorithm filter out resumes. All the applications go into the ATS, and it's there for recruiters to review. So there's no necessarily screening of resumes. Again, in my experience, I haven't seen that. We're going through all of them. At times we'll have thousands of resumes, but we are going through each and every one of them. It's a lot of work. So that's why, the point of having a clear and concise resume are important because, again, you're going through a ton of them. So there's no algo. What I will say, just some general tips: make sure it's a PDF. It's easy to read. You're highlighting the important things at the top, just to make sure you're getting someone's attention.
Yeah, that's super helpful to know. Another relevant question kind of around that. This person is asking that what tool would you suggest to build your resume? I remember I have a very similar question back then. Was like, should I put in a PDF file? Should it be a Word file? And then I've heard people talking about like it will parse better by the algorithm if you use a Word file versus a PDF.
It's up to you, honestly. Like my preference is a PDF. It's easy to read. You can't edit it at all. The integrity of the resume stays consistent. I love a PDF, but again, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and also another thing I like about PDF is that when you open it, no matter what device you're opening it from, it's all the same. However, I noticed one thing about Word is that if you're using maybe Microsoft Word versus like a Google Doc, the format or it might shift a little bit of the font, and then it might look kind of weird if they're not using the same kind of like app that you are using.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have one more question actually from my end. So I recently kind of sent out a survey on LinkedIn. I was curious that how people feel about their certificate experience, because there are so many companies out there that is offering like data related certification, and a lot of people, and also it's not cheap to get those. You might spend like hundreds of bucks like get to be able to like take the exam. And I'm curious, like from recruiter perspective, when do you feel like certificate is a really good positive signal to you, or is that something that you feel like maybe you don't care about? Is that something that you would recommend people to get if that's something that's relevant for the work?
I think it's a positive signal in that it shows me that you're interested in learning more, right? You're looking to gain more exposure, understand some of the like newer technology out there. There's definitely positive signs. I will say that it's not just about the technical aspects or the data, right? There are the soft skills that are really important to a role. So again, make sure you're balancing that information on your resume by yes, showing this that you've gotten a certificate, but also highlighting some of the non-technical stuff. How did you partner with other people? How are you able to influence and push certain projects forward? I think those are also just as important. And so again, it kind of comes down to a balance of the two.
Yeah. And also my perspective is that there's so many ways you can learn a skill. I think certificate is one of them, and it does have the benefit that is little bit like authorized by some company, prove that you have put in certain amount of effort to learn a skill, right? In a way, I feel like that might be something you might want if, let's say, you don't have like a educational degree that's relevant and you want to use that as a showcase that, hey, I have the basic knowledge in this specific field I'm interested in. And also at the same time, I heard a lot of colleagues that they actually like to take certificate exam just as a way to learn. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective, because actually it's a really good perspective, because it is a very it's a kind of guided learning program with very clear roadmap. And if you don't know like, hey, how to get started with data engineering, they might want to take a certificate exam, and then they will give you all the necessary content that you need to learn and prepare for that. So that could be a good way to learn too. Okay, I'm going to take one more question here. So Winston's asking me what my experience from initially submitting my resume to Netflix and through the interview process and finally received the offer letter. Yeah, so I would say my journey to Netflix is a little bit eventful, and I actually didn't directly apply for the role from Netflix Korea. And what happened to me, I actually talk a little bit in some of my from my blog post, is that I went to this Women in Data meetup. It was 3 years ago. I know, Patricia, I was telling you about like why we should host more events in the future, right? Yeah, I went to this like in-person kind of networking event hosted by both Netflix and Women in Data together. And then after the event, they invited me to like a different data dinner with the Netflix teams, and that was super awesome because I get to meet and just chat, having dinner with a few data engineering managers at Netflix. So I was able to make that personal connection just through networking, and in a way, that was something that was really surprising to me, because that was really an experience that made me think about how networking and also in personal connection can open more doors to job opportunity for me. And and years later, after those events, when I was looking for a new opportunity, I reached out to some of those engineering managers that I connected back then, and they told me that, hey, we do have some open roles on my team, so how do you feel about interviewing? So I kind of like, through the networking and personal connection LinkedIn, I get into the interviewing process. And honestly, sometimes I thought to myself, I don't know if I would get to interview if I just directly submit a resume through, the kind of the general pipeline that they have on the career page, right? And then honestly, the interview process, it was the best one I ever had. It's super personalized, and I feel like everything they're asking about is super relevant to kind of day-to-day work as a data engineer. And I had a really good experience. The interview process was really long, though. I feel like I have met maybe 8 or 10 people from different teams in data engineering, and they really want to make sure that I'm the right person they want to hire. But also, good thing is that I actually met people who work on this team that I'm currently in, so that in a way it also tells me more about what exactly the type of work this team is doing and whether that's something I want to do. And they also trying to see that, hey, it's something we want to work with, right? And I don't know how long the interview process, I don't remember. It's probably take a month or two, but at the end, it's all worth it. So from my experience from Netflix, that's kind of one reason I always tell people, like, build the connections, because like from my perspective, a lot of times, interview itself, you only have a couple of hours to try to tell how good this person is. However, if you have some chance to connect with this person even before the interview, or it's somebody who have worked with you, those signals are even a lot stronger than going through an interview panel. So network and network and network. And I think you are maybe at the one point you don't really know, like, why am I here? Is this really going to be helpful for my career? But it is a long time investment that someday you'll just realize that, wow, I didn't think about like just that conversation I had is going to take me to a new job, right?
Most definitely. I feel like, we've hired folks that we've talked to years ago. They weren't looking at the time. It just like wasn't the right timing, but we've kept in touch, checked in every now and then. And we've had folks that come in, a few years later. So definitely +1 on the networking. I think it's such a big thing. And it opens up a lot of doors in the future.
Yeah, completely. And so, yeah, thank you guys so much. So I really appreciate everybody who's coming here today, listening to our talk. I hope that was really helpful. I hope that was helpful for you preparing your resume, getting ready for applying for a job. And, I'll be excited to create more content, or maybe another event we talk more about preparing for interviews. And I also see a lot of comment that people are interested in. Maybe we'll do another resume practice session about different data role. It could be analytical engineer, analyst. Well, Patricia, I'm looking at you, so
No pressure.
But Yeah, thank you so much, Patricia. I think your advice and information was super helpful for me as well. And thank you for your time preparing and reviewing all these resumes. And thank you for everyone who come in here. And I had a really good time and looking forward to see you guys again in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.